Salve! Hello. Today, Kyle, angry archaeologist, giving a tour of the Guildwood Park in Toronto, Ontario. It's a strange park in the Scarborough, Guildwood area that has a bunch of Roman facades that were preserved in the 1950s as a result of the works of Rosa and Spencer Clark. Now, the grounds itself was originally built for this Colonel Bickford. However, in the 1950s, the Rosa and Spencer Clark wanted to turn the area into this open-air art museum, and so it wasn't until the 1970s that the Canadian government started to pass laws that protected buildings that had heritage status. So thankfully, before that, Rosa and Spencer Clark were able to preserve a lot of the Roman and classical facades that were built in the late 19th century to the 1920s area of time. And so the park just has a bunch of these open areas of Roman ruins everywhere that are quite beautiful. I'm sporting a little toga, just showing you some impressive gates here. A lot of the buildings, you can see where they came from originally. They have placards that tell you the origin of them. So this is from a building that was referred to as a temple building. Everything has a classical or a Roman artistic motif to it. However, many things express a Canadian national identity. So the provinces have emblems in a Greco-Roman style, referencing, at least in their forms and artistic expression, Greco-Roman mythology and artistic forms from that period. So I just wanted to give a visual tour of this amazing open-air park, and this is the closest you can get to experiencing ruins of ancient Rome in Toronto, Ontario. It's definitely cheaper than going to Italy. And some of the facades are quite beautiful, and they're rented out often for various events. It's a great park to go to if you're just looking for some time to kill or just to enjoy the day. And I wanted to use this park as an opportunity to talk about education in the Roman world, because I had already created this a Roman tablet. So this Roman tablet, two tablets of routed out wood with wax in it. I had stained it with some tea and some rust to make it look older. And well, I kind of gave up on the stylus and used a screwdriver as a stylus. But the tablet is actually quite difficult to write on when it's the wax is really dry. But soft wax, which is a little hot, is actually really easy to use. And I wanted to take this Roman tablet to the Guildwood Park with all the Roman facades and talk about how education worked in the Roman world. The picturesque Roman facades once decorated buildings in the downtown Toronto core area. When the buildings were scheduled for demolition, the philanthropic owners of the park saved them. My source book for this video is As the Romans Did, 2nd edition by Joanne Shelton. It's an invaluable source of primary documents related to how the Romans experienced all aspects of life, not just education. I highly recommend it. Education was not just for the elites of the Roman world, from the Republic to the Imperial time. We're also going to be looking at the mundane and regular people of the Roman world and how education affected them. The first level of Roman education was a literator, also called a magister, more often a literator. So boys and girls 7 to 11 would learn basic math, reading, memorization, repetition. Often a moral phrase was used. Morality was imparted to the children. Business for young boys and household maintenance, household business, fractions, percentages. These things were very important to the Roman educational system in regards to a lot of bartering, money, currency. Knowing this was important. Teachers writ large. So teaching was not a lucrative profession. Private tutors likely earned more. But these freemen, the teachers were often freemen or former slaves. They started classes really early to make use of sunlight. And we have Marshall, who would often complain in epigrams that he wants to pay the teachers to be quiet rather than shout out lessons. We have even some Romans who really criticized learning anything that wasn't absolutely practical. We just wanted to learn, basic math and reading and writing and nothing else. But that was not shared by everyone. So in Roman education, the responsibility was for the father to educate their children, especially the father, the poetas patri supreme in Roman law. We have Cato the Elder, so before Julius Caesar, someone who was very critical of Greek and also an athletic coach for his children. This vocational training, we have evidence of young girls being trained in hairdressing, gold working, and we have it preserved on tombstones. And also a young boy who could learn to be a sculptor, but the family had to pay for the upkeep of the vocational training. So the Roman literator could have clad his classes really anywhere, met his students outside. The students would have been accompanied by a piadiag, someone who was paid, a slave that was paid by the family to protect their children in the early hours. The togas indicated the status and age of people in Rome. There's a complicated system. A purple toga indicated a child, for instance. And the system wasn't really a system. It was really just people being paid by the families who could afford to pay a literator, a magister, to teach their children reading, writing, and memorization, and Roman morality, really. So the second stage of the Roman education was what's known as a grammaticus. It was similar to our high school, except it was from like 11 to 15. Now the focus of a grammaticus was on way more than just grammar, language, literature, music, astronomy, philosophy, natural science. It's interesting that astronomy and science were actually taught in order to impart a better appreciation of poetry. However, we need to avoid one-to-one equations when it comes to ancient Rome. Or what they called poetry could have encompassed a lot more than what we would consider, emotional expression. They had complicated, treatises on natural science that were written poetically, for instance. And so this would be for like middle class and higher members of Roman society. The other people would have been working at this age. One famous grammaticus from around the time of Cicero, time of Julius Caesar, was Orbilius. Now he was orphaned during the Civil War. His parents were killed, quote, by a treacherous plot of their enemies. After a stint in the Roman cavalry, he taught in Rome during Cicero's consulship. He published a book titled Trials and Tribulations, which he complains about the treatment he received from parents of students. Horace called him the teacher who loves the whip, so big on corporal punishment, or bilius, but quite famous and apparently effective grammaticus. And it's at this point we start to see Romans disagreeing about education at the grammaticus level. So Quintilian and elements of oratory, unlike Cato the Elder, he stressed the importance of Greek and what we can call elective studies. Referring to the role of grammaticus writ large, he said, unless foundations for the future orator have been carefully laid down by the grammaticus, the whole superstructure will collapse. And he references, there are doctrines of philosophy written in Greek by Empedocles, so way before his time, about 500 years in the 5th century BCE, about the nature. So natural sciences written in poetic hexameter, and there are also some Latin Roman poets that wrote later on in the same sort of hexameter poetic style. So it reveals that poetry encompassed a lot more than what we consider poetry today. But disagreements about the importance of Greek in education. The third and the highest level of education available to only the elites, really, of Roman society was studying with a rector. Now, the higher up you went in the Roman education system, it became apparent that the overall goal is to learn how to speak as an orator. And now there were three elements to that. There was declamation, suasoria, and controversia. Now, the goal was to speak fluently and persuasively on any topic for any length of time. Now, the three elements that were used to achieve that were the declamation aspect refers to the style of speaking, so the acting, how to project, modulate the voice, performative aspect of oratory, public speaking, and gestures of oratory as well. It was a very theatrical business. Now, the other two elements are more specific and more academic. So a suasoria is arguing for a particular course of action, so for politicians and generals. And a controversia is arguing one side of a point of law, so something specific for lawyers. So an example of a suasoria would have been Mark Antony has issued an order for Cicero's execution. Cicero deliberates. Should he beg Antony for mercy? So that would be an example of what to do in Cicero. If you were Cicero in that case, it's kind of open-ended, has a lot to do with masculinity, and the sort of patriarchal nature of Roman society. Conversely, controversia tend to be more specific. So, for example, the law states children must support their parents or be thrown into prison, a patria potestas, specifically the father. But you will be given a hypothetical situation in which a father disowns his son, adopted by his uncles. Uncle becomes wealthy. The uncle hates the father, but the son remembers the father, and although the father became poor, the son decided to help him with his uncle's money, and the uncle decided to disown his nephew. And then you would be asked to argue either for or against the father or the uncle in that hypothetical context. Now, the overly kind of vague and hypothetical nature of the suasoria or the controversa, and even declamation, the sort of performative theatrical aspect of public speaking, it appears to have been emphasized in later periods, so like more style, less substance, and authors like Tacticus in a dialogue on orators, or Junival in satires, criticized the overemphasis on style as opposed to substance, and they also bemoaned the loss of, or the apparent disappearance of the vocational training for rhetoric. That is to say, young Romans were paired up with a lawyer and went to the forum and would actually see public laws being debated or public actions being debated by the citizens. I suspect that might have something to do with the disengagement of the public in political life during the imperial period. And an interesting example, the first example of a public school system, I guess you could say, in Rome was during Vespasian, an emperor. He paid, I believe there were literators to teach children, but they were subsidized by the state. The parents of wealthy children still had to pay for it. So it's an example of potential imperial overreach, trying to control the public discourse. And the overall message that we can get from the Roman period in education was that, it wasn't Roman education. It wasn't an institution. Really, it seems to have been a private business that changed from place to place and changed over time. But the overall goal of the elites were to become an orator in public speaking. The greatest public speaker in Roman history is arguably Cicero. And so reading the works of Cicero, which were well preserved in his famous law cases, can see it must have been a very theatrical sight to behold. We love to witness Cicero, debating the murder charges in that famous murder case that he was associated with, or denouncing the tyrants, or the Catalan conspiracy, which he didn't come out really on top of. But the education system appears to have really emphasized for elite people, oration, and also emphasized men and the role of men in society. However, elite women also were trained to become, sophisticated matrons, which, aside from the examples that we have of lesser Romans becoming hairdressers and jewelry makers, we can assume that the Roman woman, elite Roman woman, would have had access to a grammaticus or maybe even a rector. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that Cicero's son, so the students are not altogether that different then than they were today, because Cicero Jr., Cicero's son, the most elite in society, of which he was a member, could travel to Athens to further their education, even beyond the rector, but it was very rare. And Cicero, there's a letter between Cicero Jr. and the household secretary, so the household slave secretary of Cicero family. He's asking for more money, but Cicero actually had to threaten to cut him off because he was just in Athens, getting drunk all the time and partying. And so it's an interesting example of the change of, well, the lack of change, and just that we're all human being, and having an education in a different place makes one kind of indulge in alcohol and partying a bit. So I just wanted to leave that on the final note. Thank you for watching, Kyle, the Angry Archaeologist. Take care.